And we kick off this evening with a look at the cinema.
I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
Cinema history come to life.
I found my solace in the small cinema I went to every Thursday night.
I'm a professor of cinema.
I go to the cinema for the stories.
There was no competition between the cinema and seminar.
I mean, it's not within the realm of conventional cinema.
And now,
here's Space and Johnson
with a cinema review.
It is Monday, May 1st, 8 EST, and welcome to another episode of Cinemaster's Reviews. We are 1 week away from the summer movie season, but before that, we got one more weekend of really cool movies. This week, we will be reviewing Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, directed by Kelly Freeman Craig, as well as, oh boy, when I saw this fun, Big George Foreman, the miraculous story of the once and future heavyweight champion of the world, directed by George Tillman Jr., also known as Big George Foreman. We're just going to get right into our first review of the night. Are You There, God? It's me, Margaret, and joining me is one of the few people I know that watches as much recent releases as me. He is the one, the only, still coming down from the high of one of the greatest tours of our generation, Scott Harvey. Scott, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Payson. Thanks for having me. Like you said, still coming down from the high a little bit, but excited to be here and talk about this film with you because I watched it on Thursday before I devoted my entire weekend to the tour, and so I caught it early there. But yeah, like you said, see a lot of recent releases, so happy to be here.
Absolutely. I'm so happy I could have you on. But yeah, we're just going to jump right into our first movie, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, directed by Kelly Freeman Craig, formerly directed The Edge of 17 back in 2016. This is based on the very well-acclaimed Judy Blume novel from the 1970s. It is about a young girl named Margaret who comes from a household that is both Christian and Jewish in religion. And they don't really make her choose because there's conflict there, and is about her moving from the big city of New York down into the suburbs of New Jersey, and her dealing with both a new environment as well as growing up and changing as a person. Scott, the two questions I'm going to ask you are you familiar with the book or any of Judy Blume's novels? And two, are you familiar with Kelly Freeman Craig's former film, The Edge of 17?
Yeah, so as far as the first question, I am familiar with the book. It's in terms of sort of YA literature. I guess YA wasn't really a term back when this was written, but now it probably would be considered YA. It is kind of a landmark novel. I'm familiar with Judy Blume. Never read any of her books. I went to a Christian elementary school, and then I went to an all boys school for 6th through 12th grade. So we weren't talking about Judy Blume too much. It wasn't getting assigned in classes. So I never got a chance to read the book. It's a shame, really, because, having gotten older now and exposed myself more to art, obviously created by women, about women. We were talking about Taylor Swift there, her music. Obviously, people know how much I love Greta Gerwig. It's some of the art that I like has meant the most to me personally. So looking back on it, obviously, I wish I could have discovered some of it back when I was, more impressionable, I guess, as a teenager. But no, have not read the book. Would probably really enjoy it, I guess, is kind of what I'm getting at. What I do really enjoy, however, though, is Kelly Freeman Craig's other film, The Edge of 17. Definitely one of the best coming of age movies of the 21st century. I just really love the characters in that movie. Obviously, Haley Steinfeld as Nadine as kind of a iconic performance as a character who is not totally likable throughout the entire movie, but who maybe we identify with. I like the ensemble in that movie. I think her friendship with Krista, with Haley Richardson's character, is really handled well. It doesn't sort of demonize her for what her actions, and I think Irwin Kim, obviously, who's the guy that she ends up with in the end of the movie is one of the most delightful sort of love interest characters in any coming of age movie. So yes, I love that movie, seen it multiple times, and I've been waiting for quite a while for Kelly Freeman Craig to come out with something else because it's been 7 years, as you said.
You did mention Haley Lou Richardson's name, so I would just like to take a second to stand White Lotus. Mike White, we love you, and she was excellent in season 2. But yeah, just like you, I'm not super familiar with the book. Like, okay, I know obviously what the book is. I've heard the name of Judy Blume. I know who she wrote books for, and I think it's incredible, like that she gave like young girls at the time like a voice and like stories to relate to in a way. Sean Sandberg says Scott's got a great voice for radio, and honestly, I agree. That's why every day he's using that voice to protect people in the court.
2 fun facts. Number 1, I did actually have a radio show when I was in college. Number 2, you can hear me using my voice on the Some Like It Scott podcast. Sorry, not gonna shamelessly promo or anything on your show, but yeah, check us out on all podcast feeds, Spotify, Apple, Some Like It Scott. We're there.
Legit, I was going to ask you to plug it at the end of the show. I listen to it every week. We'll get more into it at the end, but yeah, great show you and Scott Shelton have, right?
That is correct. There are 2 Scotts.
Hence the name. But yeah, but also like you, I loved The Edge of 17. That was a movie that came out like a few months after I had just graduated from high school. And watching that, I was like, man, I wish I would have gotten like a movie like that while I was in high school, because like that is a movie that like perfectly shows how awkward and like in a way just how awful being in high school was if you like weren't the most social person in the world and like didn't have like the strongest friend group I unfortunately did not have. And I think Haley Steinfeld was such a revelation in that movie. Of course, she's incredible in True Grit, but like this is showed like a completely other nature. I think her relationship with Woody Harrelson is great. I think how that character goes. So yeah, with that movie, I was really interested to see what Kelly Freeman Craig's next movie would be, and seeing that she was adapting this project, which is a project that has been in the works and like in development hell for decades at this point. Like Judy Blume has fought and was very resilient for many years to have her work adapted. And it took Kelly Freeman Craig and James L. Brooks, who produced this movie, to come forward and essentially convince her. And honestly, I'm very happy they did, because just like Edge of 17, I think this is another really, really great coming-of-age movie from a female's perspective. Scott, just quick thoughts. What were your like general reactions on Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret? Yay or nay?
Yeah, I loved it. I love movies that authentically portray what it's like to be a teenager. I guess she's not technically a teenager; she's 11, but going through adolescence certainly, and everything that comes with that. Yeah, I just think it has this like sincerity about it from the very beginning that is pretty irresistible. It's funny. I definitely laughed some. It's getting into some big topics, like which I wasn't necessarily expecting. Again, I was familiar with the book, but I, didn't know exactly where the plot goes and everything. But I appreciated that it did not shy away from, you know, a couple of big topics. Religion, as you mentioned, being one of them, and then, um, you know, uh, puberty and the body and everything that happens around that time, specifically for girls. It doesn't shy away from that, despite the fact that it's aimed squarely at a teenage audience. Kind of my theater was full of like 13-year-old girls, basically, who loved the movie, which I thought was great. I just think it's great that they went to see the movie and like actually, were identifying with it because. Not to go on a diatribe, but I don't know how many like kids that age are watching like real movies nowadays. So that was nice to see. But anyway, yes, absolutely love the movie. I think the performances are incredible, especially Rachel McAdams. I mean, she is one of the most versatile actresses out there. She's just like effortless is what I think of when I see her now, and especially in this role as the mom. Like, just instantly you believe her, you like her, you identify with her. I really appreciated that the relationship between Margaret and the parents is like a very positive and wholesome sort of relationship. Like a lot of coming of age movies, that's not the case. It's a lot about the parental strife, and obviously, you think of the Ladybirds and Boyhoods and stuff like that. But here, the parents are like very sort of positive figures for the most part, and that was refreshing to see. Benny Safdie is great too as the dad. But yeah, anyway, really enjoyed the movie in general. One of my favorites from the year so far. It's my kind of movie, but it's kind of irresistible.
Yeah.
I think I can't see somebody not being at least a little bit charmed by it.
Yeah, there are a ton of things that you just mentioned that we're going to tackle, and thank you for mentioning them. But the first thing I want to say is I think it's important for movies like this to come out because we rarely ever get them. Like, I think it's really cool that this is a movie that it pitches itself as a family movie. Like on IMDb and on Letterboxd, it pitches itself as a family movie, but at the same time, it is rated PG-13 because it does tackle like topics that you wouldn't expect in most family movies, like religion, like puberty and growing up. Like I'll be honest, like menstruation is a big big topic in this movie that it talks about, and just like being uncomfortable about like your body changing. And I think it's important we have stories like this to show that like, hey, look, this is okay. And not only do we rarely get movies like this, we rarely get it from a female perspective. And I think that's really, really authentic with how it presents itself. Just like Edge of 17, I think the thing this movie really, really does well is get down cringe humor. And just like humor that just makes you feel just like, oh man, like I remember being at that age. Obviously, I'm a man, so I can't relate like completely, but like I look at the way how like these little things that these characters are dealing with that they think are like the biggest deal in the world, and then you're just looking back and you're like, oh sweetie, it's gonna be okay. Like what did you think of the cringe humor in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm notorious, I guess, if you have seen me on other shows and stuff, it's hard to get me to laugh in movies. I don't know why that is. I don't know whether I'm hard-hearted or not. But I definitely got a few chuckles in this movie. There's a scene where they find the Playboy and are looking at it that I think is pretty amusing. Just the conversations that happen between the little friend group that she forms are kind of funny. But then, yeah, their interactions with boys, is where some of this humor comes from. And there's, of course, the classic spin the bottle scene. There's this one kid whose birthday party it is. That's really sort of a dweeb, and he again, some of the cringe humor definitely comes from him at various points through the movie. So I liked that. It's not necessarily always my type of humor, but it wasn't annoying. It wasn't repetitive. It didn't get in the way of like the emotional beats that the movie was trying to hit. And so, even if there was nothing that like was gut busting, I thought it was charming, and I laughed because I liked the characters and the situations were funny.
During that spin the bottle scene that you mentioned, there is a certain needle drop that happens during that had me dying because it's so perfectly used that when that song comes on and it's like, this is the stupidest thing, but I love it. And like, that is exactly how the characters would be viewing it at that point. And I think Kelly Freeman Craig is really, really good at getting into like the mindset of these characters and making you see the world from their point of view.
Yeah, I'm glad that the spin the bottle scene again. Sometimes those can get really dicey in movies, and it got close here. But I'm not going to spoil too much or whatever. But I thought it was handled very tastefully, considering that the characters are only 11 years old. I don't think you're going to feel like gross about watching it or anything.
No, absolutely. Like this is a PG-13 movie. I'm guessing just for the subject matter. Because, there really isn't any swearing in the movie. Nothing really gets too obscene. Like I think it's a fine, I think it does a really good job at towing that line. What I wanted to tackle, like you said, I think the cast of this film is great. And the first person I want to mention is Abby Ryder Forston, who plays the title character of Margaret, is such a revelation. She's asked to do a lot in the film. She's essentially in every scene. She narrates the movie because throughout the entire movie, she is talking to God in a way as she's trying to find kind of like her faith in the world and how she's going to view the world. The way she interacts with all of her friends, whether it's Nancy, whether it's this guy, whether it's Nancy's brother Moose, or is it Moose isn't Nancy's brother. Moose is Nancy's brother.
Friend of Nancy's brother.
Yeah. Who like she may or may not have a crush on. I think is great. I forget this one character she meets, but it's this one character who's essentially like grown up a little faster than the other characters.
Laura,
Laura, and I think what happens there is great. But yeah, I think Abby Ryder Forreston was excellent. She nails the comedic moments. She nails the dramatic moments like towards the end. What did you think about her, Scott?
Yeah, she's great in the movie. People might know her as being the young Cassie Lang in the Ant-Man movies. Before Catherine Newton obviously took over the role. But this is obviously a much bigger, more important, more substantial role than what she was doing there. And I think she was great. Yeah, I mean, she strikes the right balance. Sometimes I think you have these characters these protagonists in these movies that are like wallflowers, I guess, to borrow from another coming of age movie, to a point where it's like almost not realistic. Or, you have like somebody who's just super extrovert. I guess I'm thinking about like Cher or somebody from Clueless. Who, again, I love Clueless. It's a comedy. It's not trying to really
that's Clueless is essentially like a cartoon in a way, and I love Clueless, but like it's obviously over the top.
Not meant to be relatable though.
Yeah.
But then she's right in that sweet spot though of like she just seems like a real. I mean, first of all, they cast somebody who I think she's 13 or 15 in real life, so she's around the right age for it. Was even closer when this movie was filmed, I'm sure. So it's not like, one of these recent movies where you have, Ben Platt or somebody playing a high schooler. So that right away is believable. And then she just has like the right level of precociousness where it's not like, this doesn't feel like somebody who was written, right? And is like, oh, well, we have this like hyper smart teenagers. Like if you saw White Noise, again, I loved White Noise, but like the teenagers in that movie do not talk like real teenagers. And they're not supposed to. It's a heightened universe. But anyway, sometimes you get that in these movies too, where the teenagers don't actually talk like that. The adolescents don't actually talk like that. And that wasn't the case with her either. I think, she's authentic throughout. She has that right level of curiosity, but also, still just a little bit naive about what's going on and vulnerable. Some of the scenes between her and Rachel McAdams, again, they just play off each other really well. And I think she's great. She absolutely anchors the movie. Like you said, she's in every scene, and you learn to love her character really early on, really quickly.
Yeah, we've touched on Rachel McAdams and Ben Safdie, and yeah, just like you, I think they are really, really good. I think Ben Safdie's really good. I think he's showing himself that like whenever he pops up, it's always fun to see him. I know you love Licorice Pizza just as much as I do. I love his little story in that. I really enjoy.
Stars at Noon last year. He shows up in towards the end. Yeah, but he's really good in it. Like, yeah, he could be a really cool character actor, I think, if he wants to like lean into that role. Like you said, like these 3 roles now that he's sort of done are big time like character actor type performances.
But yeah, Rachel McAdams, this is like up there for me as one of my favorite roles of her. Like it's not like a super loud role. Like it's not like she never has like that moment, but I think she has such like a caring nature to her, and such like she's able to sell this dialogue so well. And I love that the relationship between Margaret and Barbara, which is her mom's name, never ends up becoming like a volatile or hostile relationship. And I think that's a welcome change, because like I personally like I love movies about characters that maybe have like troubling relationships with their parents. I always had a I always had a very good relationship with my mom and dad. So it was kind of like a breath of fresh air to be like, oh yeah, like characters like these do exist. And I think, yeah, all the scenes with Barbara and Margaret, like when Margaret first comes home from her first friend meeting and is just like, I want to buy a bra. And Barbara's like, are are you sure? But like she tries to talk her down.
But she does it, yeah.
But when Margaret says she wants it, she's like, okay. And then in that first scene when Margaret puts it on, Barbara's like, so how is it? And Margaret's like, I want to take it off. And she's like, okay.
Welcome to being a woman, yeah. Or whatever.
Welcome to this life. Yeah, and there's one storyline with her character which I think had a chance to be really good. I think it's a little rushed towards the end, which I think we'll get into. But yeah, I loved Rachel McAdams in this movie. There are some great performances. Kathy Bates is great as Margaret's grandmother, and I enjoy the scenes they have when Margaret goes back to New York. But yeah, I think the two stand-up performances were Rachel McAdams and Abby Ryder Forston.
There's one moment of Rachel McAdams, just like it's just such a small moment, but I loved it when they're in the furniture store. It's the furniture store, I think. Yeah, when they go to buy the couch or whatever it is that she's trying to buy, and she's sitting in one of those like mushroom chair type things, like revolving mushroom chair things. Rachel McAdams is, and this is the moment when Margaret asks her like about periods or something, like when's the normal time to get a period, something like I don't even remember. And she just like swivels around in the chair and like has this look on it is perfect, like comedic timing, the way that she plays that in that scene. But also real quick, you said like she doesn't have the big moment, and I think you're right. But honestly, they give her this one scene where she is talking about what happened with her parents in the past and the fact that they basically disowned her because she married a Jewish man. That could have been the big scene, right? But she plays it so down to earth and, perfectly believable that it doesn't come off that way. It doesn't come off like she's trying too hard or like this is the Oscar clip or whatever. It's crazy she's only been nominated for one Oscar, by the way, because, again, she's one of the GOATs. But anyway, she's fantastic.
You look back, you could argue she should have been nominated for Mean Girls. Like, she is excellent in that film.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Amazing comedic performance.
Yeah, and we touched earlier on about how this movie handles Margaret's essentially like religious identity, and throughout the entire movie, because her dad is Jewish and her mom came from a Christian household, you learn that they essentially have made this agreement of like, okay, we're not going to put any sort of religious identity on Margaret until she wants to decide. And then slowly throughout the movie, you learn to discover why that is. You learn to discover that Margaret's mom was a little prejudiced towards Margaret's dad. And you learn that Kathy Bates' character, Sylvia, kind of has a bit of a... maybe vendetta isn't the right word, but sort of like she wants to make sure that Margaret ends up being Jewish because she sees how much Barbara's parents hurt Margaret's dad. And I think this is probably arguably the most adult topics the movie tackles, and I think it handles it fairly well. I think towards the end it gets a little too rushed. Like, it feels like this big moment that's been happening that we've been building up to towards the movie is kind of over in like 5 minutes. But like, other than that, I think it's handled pretty well. Scott, what did you think?
Yeah, I think this is honestly the aspect of the story that maybe has aged like the best because I guess, kind of I'm trying not to spoil, but there's kind of a realization that Margaret comes to that maybe she doesn't need religion in a way, but can perhaps still believe in the higher power. And that is something that I think statistics have shown is much more common against among young adults nowadays is, saying, I am Christian, I am Jewish, whatever, but I'm like not religious, right? Because religion now has a lot of baggage that comes with it. And that's borne out by the prejudices shown by the parents, particularly of Barbara. But then, Kathy Bates' character, yeah, she's obviously she's likable and she's the nice grandmother and everything who's treated her right. But she doesn't come off very well in this scene either, because she's also instigating the argument and everything that happens. And And so it just kind of shows like the pettiness that religion and like these organized factions, if you will can get into, and that stuff gets in the way of like the actual faith part of it. So I agree with you. I think, yeah, that the big scene or whatever maybe happens a little too quickly. Like Margaret or Barbara's family, could have been maybe more well-rounded characters. But I mean, I guess that would kind of be beside the point because they haven't really been in her life. Um, but I think the point that it eventually gets to for Margaret makes sense. And the very last line of the movie, I thought, was a nice sort of ambiguous, not ambiguous, but like, it kind of crystallizes, I think, what the movie was about. Because that scene happens, and she's like, "Oh, maybe I don't even believe in God, whatever." I was like, "Is that how it's going to end? Like, is that how that thematic, part is going to end?" And then they throw that line at the end of the movie, the very end of the movie, and I thought that was a nice note to end it on. It did basically round off the storyline in a satisfying way.
No, definitely. I feel like towards the end, I think the point it's trying to show is that, like, look, both Barbara's parents and I didn't write Benny Safdie's character's name down, but
is it Herb, maybe?
Yeah. Both Barbara's parents and Herb's parents, they're going behind their backs to try and get to Barbara to get to Margaret, and I think it's showing like, hey, regardless of what they're trying to say, that's not okay, because both Herb and Barbara made a point of like, look, this is Margaret's decision. And I think the movie does a good job at showing at the end of like, hey, Margaret is the one that came to this decision by seeing the points. And yeah, like I didn't hate that final scene. I just wish we would have considering the whole movie seems to be building up to this and keep on coming back to it, I kind of wish we would have just gotten a little bit more focus. But honestly, that's probably my biggest complaint with the film as a whole, and I really, really enjoyed overall everything else.
Apparently, that's how the book ends too. I mean, that doesn't mean they couldn't have changed it, obviously, but that's just further context, I guess.
Before we wrap up, I just want to touch on some things that I did write down. I think the soundtrack is great. Like, I think this is a really, really fun soundtrack that captures the vibe of the 70s. It's not like a super like in your face like we're in the 1970s movie, but you definitely
like Air was, for example.
Yeah,
Air had like Winky Winky soundtrack, which was good. Yeah.
I said in my review, any movie that ends with Cat Stevens is a plus in my book. Did you vibe with the soundtrack at all?
Yeah, I did. Like you said, it was kind of one of those. It was there, like, I was bobbing my head along a little bit at times. I'm trying to remember. There was one in particular. I can't remember. It didn't make a big deal about itself in a way, which I think was good, because again, the movie itself is more underplayed and isn't really making a big deal about itself in a lot of the scenes, which is the type of movie that I usually like. So I wish I could remember more of the needle drops off the top of my head, but it was pleasant. I definitely remember the Cat Stevens one, and yeah, I enjoyed it.
You know, this movie has a very like underplayed tone. This movie is scored by Hans Zimmer, and you would have no idea until you see
you really would.
Scored by Hans Zimmer. I remember seeing that, and I was like, oh,
yeah.
It's interesting. So, Scott, we review movies on a scale of 0 to. Were there any things you wanted to say before we head into our final ratings?
The only like minor complaint that I had with the movie was the character of Nancy, which is the neighbor. I thought they got like 90% of the way there with getting a good character there. And then they just couldn't quite stick the landing. That was the thing that like I was left a little in the end like, because they set her up as like, oh, she's the mean girl, but also like it's more complex than that. It's it's sympathetic towards the character in a way that I liked. Like I thought it was a good portrayal of that. And then like there's a big scene that happens with her, and then Margaret just is kind of like, okay, I'm done with her. We have one more little moment with her at the end when they're at the school fair or whatever it is there. Like, doesn't even really have a line or anything. It's just like she kind of comes to a realization, maybe, but we don't really get what exactly happens in that moment, and then she's gone after that. So I thought there could have been a little bit more with that character, because they did a great job of setting her up. It just kind of like got to a certain point in the story, and it was like, okay, we just have to get rid of her now, and that's it.
Of all the characters in the movie, she seems like the only one that was not given like a real conclusion. Like it feels like the relationship between her and Margaret just sort of like stopped, which I guess maybe you could say is like kind of like a metaphor for growing up. Like you don't always get a conclusion with everyone, but considering how prominent of a character she was, like aside for like she was probably like Margaret's like main friend throughout the entire movie. It feels weird that that's the one character we don't get a full conclusion to.
The actress was good though. I'll give her credit. The young actress, Elle Graham, I think is her name. She was solid.
Yeah. So, Scott, we do review movies on a scale of 0 to 10 here at Cinemasters Review. 0 is an awful, awful movie. 0 to very little redeeming qualities. One that physically hurts you to think about. One that you think if you were to erase movies, these would probably be the ones you would try to erase, even though I personally don't believe in that. And 10 is a wonderful, wonderful experience, like a one that you are going to remember for your entire lifetime, one that just reminds you how much you love movies, just an incredible display of filmmaking and storytelling throughout. Scott, on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, what would you give this movie?
I might give it a flat 9.0. I really enjoyed it. It's up there with one of my favorite movies of the year. There's like 4 or 5 that are kind of cycling between right now. Obviously, it's early in the year, but most of them actually came out in April. April has been a great month for new releases, in my opinion, and this was a nice way to finish it off.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking with one of my friends last night, and we were just talking about how like this past month has been. It seems like we're getting just like great movie after great movie after great movie, and yeah, 9 out of 10. That is an excellent score. I'm gonna go slightly a little lower, but I'm still gonna give it a really good score of an 8.5. I think those minor critiques I had keeps it quite from being like one that I absolutely adore, but I still think this is an important movie that I love that we are getting more of. I would recommend honestly anyone check this out in theaters. These are types of movies I wish we had more of. I know I say that a lot about a lot of different types of movies, but just coming of age movies about young people around this age, specifically about young girls, I think are excellent, are very important stories to tell. So if you have the time, please go see this in the theater. But yeah, we are going to go into our transitional phase of the show. If you guys have any questions or comments about the movie, or you just want to ask Scott or me a question, you can. But Scott, the question I want to field to you, this is a great coming of age movie. What is your favorite coming of age movie of the past 10 years?
It's a big question for me because a lot of these are not just, some of my favorite movies of the last decade or so, but favorite movies of all time. So there are quite a few that I could say. Of course, I think everybody knows how much I love Little Women. If I was purely going on my favorite, then that would probably be the answer. As far as like best movie, I think that represents coming of age, though, I'm gonna say Boyhood. I mentioned it earlier. It's a movie that not everyone loves because of how low key it is, and the fact that it is deliberately not portraying the big moments that you are used to seeing in these sort of coming of age movies, the graduations, the birthdays, the first kiss, all of these sort of tropes. They're not in the movie. But that I think is part of the point of what Richard Linklater is trying to do and show how it's actually like these sort of mundane moments that maybe don't even seem like very important to you at the time, that when you look back on, it's a collection of those moments that really crafted you into the person that you are. And maybe some of those moments, again, when you're watching them in the movie, seem mundane or unassuming. But I think by the time you get to the movie, at the end of the movie, and Mason is going off to college, you realize how much they have actually each one of those moments has crafted the person that you now see, um, as Mason at the end of the movie, like the fully formed character. So obviously it was an amazing experiment to like do, film the movie over 12 years like Linklater did. But I think the end product, is just so powerful that it's one of my favorite movies of all time. It kind of like changed the way I even think about my life and growing up again, just kind of with the ideas that I'm talking about there. Um, I know it's not everyone's favorite. I know it's not for everyone, but um, I absolutely love it. And I'm very sad that Richard Linklater, that was his chance to get the Oscar, I think, which he richly deserves, in my opinion. And they gave it to some other guy instead. We'll leave his name out, but
I hate to say it, I personally think it went to the right person, but I still
yeah, I
love.
know. Again, I realize that at least in this community, I'm probably on my own island with that take, but I think obviously this would have been the one to win for, given the career Oscar, if nothing else. But he did deserve it, in my opinion. But anyway,
Yeah,
Boyhood,
I
amazing movie, masterpiece.
phenomenal pick, and I think just like maybe the crowning achievement of coming of age movies in a way of just shooting it over 12 years, just showing like it's not just Mason's life, but you're seeing like in a weird way like this small part of America like grow throughout from it's 2002 to 2014, correct?
Right.
So which
And
is
the
like
parent, yeah, I was going
yeah,
to say the parents too are also coming of age over the movie. That's one of the things it portrays really well. Is it's not just Mason growing up, like the mom and dad characters that you see at the beginning of the movie have changed so much by the time you get to the end.
yeah, absolutely. I think Ethan Hawke is really, really underrated. Like
Oh yeah,
Patricia Arquette won her Oscar. Like I think everyone talks about how great she is. I wish more people would talk about Ethan Hawke because I think his character is really, really cool. Because honestly, he's weirdly growing up just as much as Mason when you first
for
see
sure.
him, and he's an adult, but like he's a little bit more irresponsible than maybe like you would hope a parent would be. And then seeing him by the end, he is a completely different person with his new family. He's reconciled his differences with Patricia Arquette. No, I think Boyhood is a phenomenal choice, Scott. My personal favorite, you mentioned it earlier in the show. It's maybe my favorite movie of the 2010s. I love Lady Bird. I adore Lady Bird with every single fiber of my being. I think what Greta Gerwig perfectly captures how things like feel so much more important when you're that age than they really are. The relationship between Christine and her mom, played by Laurie Metcalf. You want to talk about Oscars that I'm mad about? The fact that Laurie Metcalf lost to Allison Janney, who I think is good,
Oh
and
yeah,
I think Metcalf is doing circles around her in this movie.
yeah.
I think that's one of the most complex relationships between a child and their parent that I think I've ever seen in a film. Just the fact that like you have a scene to Dave Matthews Band's Crash Into Me, and it actually makes you feel like emotional. When like usually I just think that song's like really cheesy. But yeah, I think Timothy Chalamet is so funny in that movie as this like douchebag boyfriend she has. Beanie Feldstein, their friendship is so beautiful. Relationship she has with her father, played by Tracy Letts, who I think is incredible. Yeah, Lady Bird. That is a movie that as I've gotten older, I realize how much that movie means to me because I think I just see so much of myself in the character of Christine and how she views the world. And scenes that always make me cry is that last phone call at the end, where I think now that she is away, she realizes how much her home and how much her family truly, truly means to her.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone knows. I could watch this movie every week, like, and never get tired of it. Like, just all the little moments. Like, you don't even want to get me started because I will talk about something I love from every single scene in this movie. But yes, Laurie Metcalf, it's one of my favorite performances of all time. Honestly, like, it is the quintessential mom performance when I think of, a screen mom. I think of her and obviously Saoirse Ronan and the whole cast, but yeah, it's just Greta Gerwig is the real star as always in her writing, and I just love that scene of her with the nun and oh, you must love San Francisco the way you write about it. Well, I was just describing it. Don't you think they're the same thing, love and attention, like just so many amazing lines that stick with you, and also very funny. Again, she's able to weave the comedy and the more serious stuff just so effortlessly. So
I mean,
you can't go wrong with that.
talk about uncomfortable scenes. The scene in the assembly where they're talking about
Mhm.
abortion.
Well,
It
if she'd
just
had the abortion, then we wouldn't be in this assembly. Yeah.
one of the hardest like laughs I think I've had like in a theater, honestly, like ever in my life. Like that moment is just perfect.
It's pretty
Um,
shocking. Yeah.
yeah. Scott, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
tonight. Before you leave, would you like to plug your podcast one last time? Because it's an awesome podcast. I'd recommend anyone listen to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. If you like what Payson is doing here with this show, and I don't know how you couldn't. It's great. Go ahead and check out Some Like It Scott as well. We're doing the same sort of thing over there. It's myself, my best friend Scott Shelton. We're reviewing new releases. Actually, our next episode will be about Are You There, God? Me, Margaret. It is It's Me, Margaret. It's coming out later this week. We also have a countdown series going on right now on films of Wes Anderson. I believe the Royal Tenenbaums episode was the last one that dropped. So I don't agree, but he doesn't have any bad movies. So, but anyway, we're doing that in the lead up to Asteroid City. So check it out. Again, all podcast platforms. Some Like It Scott. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott. But yeah, Some Like Scott, everyone check it out. Scott, you're one of my favorite people in this community to just like talk about movies, like genuinely, like I don't think I tell you that enough, but like I think your opinions on movies, like you have such a like an interesting like take. Whether or not I agree with it or not, it's just fun to hear like what you have to think. And
thank you. You don't have to agree with me.
No.
That's a nice comment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great night, Scott.
You too. See you.
All right, that was fun. Thank you, Scott, once again for coming on here to talk about Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. But we are going to be moving on to our second review of the night. Just me, but it is Big George Foreman, the story of the famed heavyweight boxer George Foreman. You follow his rise to gaining that. Well, actually, you start as him as an adolescent going to military school and then realizing that his temper sort of makes him a little inadequate for the military, but his supervisor, played by Forrest Whitaker, essentially tells him, George, you would be an incredible boxer. So he rises, he becomes a champion. You see his rise, you see his fall, you see a near-death experience he has, and you essentially see his entire life of eventually deciding, you know what, after he has that near-death experience, I want to try to get that championship one more time. Yeah, this is a movie directed by George Tillman Jr., who has had an interesting filmography when I actually looked up his movies he's made. Bad movies such as The Longest Ride, which to me is just like a complete like Nicholas Sparks, like trashy, like complete wash of a film. I remember seeing that when I first started working at a theater, and I was just like, I just want to see anything. I think it's still to this day the only Nicholas Sparks adaptation I've seen. I've never seen The Notebook, but I've seen the bull riding movie with Britt Robertson and Scott Eastwood. I have a problem. But at the same time, he also did a really cool movie in 2018 called The Hate You Give, which is about a young black girl played by Amandla Stenberg who is going to school in a fairly white neighborhood, and she witnesses her young friend get gunned down by the police in front of her, and just what that movie has to say about society, what this movie has to say about race relationships in America, I think is really, really powerful. So he can make really good movies. And Big George Foreman is a film, it's going to be tough to review these types of movies because it's not bad by any means, but there's really nothing special. And I think when I come on to do these sorts of shows and to talk to people about film in general, I think that leaves me with like the least amount to say, but I'm still going to try to explain. I think this is a decent movie, but I think the biggest complaint I can have about this film is it is an extremely by the numbers sports biopic. Like, you have seen this movie in so many other like movies about certain historical figures. Like, you follow George when he's a teenager and you see his life on the streets, and he grew up in a rough neighborhood, but then he goes to military school and you think that's going to fix him, but it doesn't, because he still gets bullied and he still gets picked on. And then he becomes an athlete and you see he has this incredible skill until this one other guy, this guy by the name of Muhammad Ali, you may have heard him, beats him, and then he ends up going back down. He has a near-death experience, and then decides, you know what, I'm going to give up boxing because I want to get closer to God, and I want to get closer to the Lord. So he opens up his own church. And I think the most biopic, like, okay, we're trying to really just hammer in the true story nature. Eric Roberts says the fight scenes are so boring. Yeah, honestly, like, the direction of this movie, I'm not sure if George Tillman Jr. has a ton of knowledge, like filming these sorts of like boxing scenes. But really, when you follow when you're watching a good boxing movie, whether it's Raging Bull or whether it's The Fighter, which is one that shoots its boxing scenes in a really like unique way, you should feel like really intense watching it. This one, you just sort of feel like, okay, these are happening, and that's probably the biggest complaint I can have about this movie, is for a boxing movie, the fight scenes are really like nothing special when you're watching it. But yeah, like the most biopic scene I can think of in this movie is there's a scene where he's giving a sermon, and right after it, right after the sermon, this one woman comes up and says, "Hey, can you train my son how to box? He seems like a lot like you and what you were when you were a kid." And he says, "I would love to, but I stepped away from that life." The next scene, we hear that this kid has tragically been killed because he got into a fight, and then George is like, "I could have saved him," which, like, I get what the filmmaker is trying to do. They're trying to make you feel sad, but like when you see these scenes, you just feel emotionally manipulative, and it just leaves you doubting, like, did that really actually happen? Like, it doesn't feel organic when you're watching sort of things like that. This movie does have some positives. I think Chris Davis, who plays the lead role of George Foreman, is good. I think he's pretty good when he's playing young George Foreman, who's this cocky guy. He's just starting out on in the boxing world, and he's rising up. I actually think he gets better as he goes along when he becomes older George Foreman, when his character gets more out of shape, when he becomes more of a businessman, when he's trying to make it back into. I think that's where Chris Davis really shines. Sullivan Jones, who plays Muhammad Ali, is pretty good at the role. That's a role that we've seen many actors try to do. They don't always succeed, but I think he does it in a pretty good way. He's not as big as what Muhammad Ali was, and that definitely takes a little bit getting used to. But I think once you get past that, he has the voice down. He has the look generally down. I think it's fairly solid what he does. This movie has it's funny that I'm reviewing two movies this week that are both set in the 1970s primarily. This one, once again, has a nice 70s look to it. It looks like it has a really cool way of looking like shiny and clean, which when you're following like the boxing world of the 70s makes sense, because that, of course, was when boxing was at its biggest, when nowadays you just have like YouTube celebrities boxing. Like the sport has definitely gone down the totem pole of sports. But yeah, back in the 70s, it was obviously the biggest things, and the movie does a good job at showing how huge these people really were in terms of their status and their stature in the world. During the middle of the movie, George has an accident with a fighter where he completely goes completely comatose during a fight, and you think he's gonna die, and then he's quickly saved, and he attributes that all to God, which is what happened with George Foreman. He attributed all his talent to God, and for about 20 minutes in the movie, it does kind of leave boxing to the side to become a religious movie. I know that can put some people off. I don't think it becomes preachy like at all during the movie. Like, you can think of certain PureFlix movies that absolutely do that. I don't think the film does that, but I do think the movie is probably at its most interesting when it is following his boxing career. A weird like little nitpick I had with the movie is, and maybe like this is just my weird like nerdy mind thinking, like, why didn't they tackle that? They touch on the success of the George Foreman grills in like one line, and then never bring it up again. Like, that's all. Like, they just say, "Well, George, with the success of your grills, we don't think you're going to have to go into any sort of boxing match for the rest of your life." And that's all we get on the grills. And as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, I kind of wanted to see these grills. Maybe it's because I wasn't, like, super invested in the story. But I'm thinking, like, what if we got, like, an Air-esque movie? I know to bring up Air, but, like, we got an Air-esque movie on the George Foreman grills. Eric Roberts says they should have given him a 12-inch afro. I did not look up. They showed pictures of George Foreman at the end, and he doesn't have quite the 12-inch afro. But you know what? Afros are cool hairstyles. I'm never gonna say no to an afro. But yeah, I think overall, I think this movie is fine. Once again, he meets a woman early on, and I think as you're watching the movie, they marry pretty early, and you're just like, okay, when is he gonna break up with her, because he ends up getting caught cheating, like in most of these biopics, and I'm sure actually happened in George Foreman's life, so I can't get too mad at the movie sticking true to the true events. But at the end of the day, I'm there to watch an interesting movie, and I don't think this movie quite hits the the levels that you want when you're watching a really good sports biopic, which there are really, really good ones. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I have to say. It wasn't a too terribly interesting movie. But yeah, I think if I were to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, I think I would give it or 0 to 10. I would give it a slight passing grade of a 6. I think the performances are good. Forrest Whitaker, I didn't really mention him, but I think he's good as like the elder statesman. He's really the only like recognizable actor you would recognize from other things in this movie. But yeah, other than that, I think I like mentioned earlier, I think the boxing matches are really just kind of poorly directed and like noticeably poorly directed. Like when I think of a movie like Creed 3 that just came out this year, which are directed in such an incredible way, those really feel like a letdown. And yeah, the story is kind of cliche. There's nothing really special. And I think a really great movie could have been made about George Foreman. This probably just wasn't it. So that just about does it for the show. I'm going to leave questions and comments open for a little while longer in case anyone wants to ask me a question about any other movies tonight. If I were to say like what are my favorite sports biopics, Eric Roberts asks, or have him wrestle a bear at halftime at a Flint Tropics game. Oh, that is a semi-pro reference, I believe. Flint Tropics. Yes. Speaking of afros, Will Ferrell has a great afro in that movie. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. We'll always appreciate a good semi-pro reference. Jackie Moon, I believe, is the basketball player. But yeah, like Raging Bull is kind of like the standard for like incredible sports biopics. I think Ali does it pretty dang well too. Yeah, so like you can make these stories good, but I think this one just doesn't quite hit the boat and falls into a lot of cliches that you think when you think of like the unmemorable biopics. But I think that just about does it for the show. Thank you all for watching tonight. Be sure to like this video. It helps get our views out there. Remember to subscribe to the video store where we put out incredible shows every single week. This Thursday, we have the new episode of the Video Store Movie Club, the second episode. We're tackling, still can't believe Mike Hanley's making me watch these, but we're tackling the career of cult star Bill Moseley. We will be watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Rob Zombie's The Devil's Rejects, and Repo the Genetic Opera. I'm not sure how I'm going to be feeling at the end of this week, but those are what I have to watch. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Next week, we have a big review. Summer movie season will be starting. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Eric Roberts says, by the way, your hair looks fantastic. Oh, why, thank you. I will not be displaying that other comment. But yeah, next week we will be reviewing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The summer season has begun, and that's going to be one of the biggest movies this summer. I got a guess. I was really, when I first wanted him, I was like, okay, I want to make sure I get him for the right movie. Cody Newberry, someone that does not have the most positive opinions on all the Guardians movies, will be joining me, but I think we're going to have a great discussion regardless of what he thinks. Cody's one of the most well-spoken people in this community, so I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And because there's not another like really big movie to cover that next week, I'm going to be doing a summer movie preview to fill in for my second review next week. Obviously, the summer movie season will technically have started, but we'll have tons of other things to cover. I'm going to try to get a guest. I haven't reached out to him. I hope Kirk is available because I think he would be really fun to talk about the movies that are coming out, because he doesn't just have like this like hype meter just all the way to the max for most movies. He usually looks at it with a little bit of nuance like I do. So I think that's going to be a great episode next week. But thank you all for watching. Thank you for Scott for showing up and reviewing Are You There, God? It's me, Margaret, with me. Thank you all for watching once again, and have a great night.
And the award for most vapid film review of the century goes to...
Okay, movie review. Okay, I thought it was beauty.
And he's now in cinema hell, where one day we'll all be reunited.
This is me at the Regal Cinema crying as I did through much of the film.